thing in the world that she needs to do. That if respect for her daughter has any meaning, if the questions of privacy, which she herself as a policy analyst is acutely aware of and deeply committed to, if those have any meaning at all, then the fundamental notion that you don't read other people's emails and read other people's mails and private conversations is paramount. Now, in fairness, the family had not in fact sat down and hammered out a privacy policy when they began moving emails from box to box. It was just understood. In this family, you don't do that stuff. I mean, you wouldn't read somebody else's emails. So the feeling was, even though it hadn't been articulated, that there was an understanding about that. In other words, there is a very powerful case to be made for the kind of loyalty to the privacy ideas that could completely decide this in that favor. On the other hand, there is an equally powerful case, she felt, for the fact that she as a parent had fundamental responsibility for what went on in her house, and especially for the raising of her minor children. And if in fact this was headed toward something that was as grisly, even by half, as some of the things she'd been reading in the papers, and at the end of the day, if those things came to pass, and all she could say was, no, gee, I never really bothered to find out. I didn't really know what was going on. That would be a dreadful situation to be in. In other words, what you're seeing here are two competing moral arguments, both of them that can be rooted in clear ethical standards, and both of which carry you in diametrically opposite ways. Now, as we look, and I want to sort of turn this over to you to get your thinking about this, but first let me give you a brief framework to think about this through. As we begin looking at these and listening to people around our tables talk about these, we've come to realize that although we've heard 20,000 dilemmas, we actually don't think we have. We think we've heard 4 dilemmas. There are 4 broad patterns, 4 broad paradigms into which these dilemmas fall. Let me give these to you and see whether you feel that this particular one fits into one or more of these categories. First of all, there are, and these are not in priority order, I'm just listing them because they have to be in order when I say them. First, think about the tension between truth-telling and loyalty, between candor, another way to put it, between candor and fidelity, but between honesty and allegiance, or something of that sort. Second, think about the tensions that arise between the needs of the individual and the needs of the community. The community may be the whole world, it may be the whole city, the whole school, or it may simply be the family versus the one individual. Or it may be the small family versus the whole school system, or something like that. The sort of us versus them distinctions, where there are moral arguments for us and there are moral arguments for them, and sometimes they don't mesh. Third, think about questions of short-term versus long-term. Think about what's right to do this moment, even though there may be profound long-term downsides. And then think about what's right to do in the long term, even though the initial, the next few days may be excruciating. You see what I mean? And finally, think about one that, as I often say in my public talks, anybody who's ever raised a parent already understands, and that is justice versus mercy. Think about this in terms of the expectation versus the exception. The expectation that this is what is fair and appropriate all across the board, and this over here is this astonishing exception to the regulations that nobody really ever contemplated before. Thinking it through in those ways, and putting yourself in the mother's position, what would you have her do? And how would you advise her as to what to do? Hello?
Hi, my name's Angela. Our group talked a lot about this, and it is a really difficult dilemma. We've all faced these kinds of, or some of us have faced these kinds of things with our own children. We saw it as a long-term versus short-term dilemma in some aspects. We also thought that safety was a bottom line here for us, that no matter, that was our priority. If our child's physical health was in danger, that would determine what we would do. But we would probably try a lot of other avenues before we would read the email. We'd try and talk to her, ask her what was going on, and try and get at it that way. If she absolutely refused to let us read the email, then we probably would read it. We were thinking that we would, in the end, risk losing her trust in the short term, hoping that she would be safe in the long term.
Hi, Jen.
Our group talked about which of the paradigms this fit within, and initially I felt that it was a truth versus loyalty issue, and my point was whether you do the short term or the long term look at this and betray the trust. My feeling was if you violated the trust, that was an issue, or that was a thing that you could never get back again. Others in my group felt that it was needs of the individual versus the needs of the group issue, where if the behavior turns really bad, that it could affect a whole lot of other people more than just the mother's daughter. So we didn't really come to a final conclusion. We were right in the middle of our conversation, but it certainly opened up some rich discussion. So thank you for that dilemma. I'd be interested in your thoughts on which of these paradigms it fits within.
Good morning. My name's Horst.
Hello, Horst.
In our discussion, we ran through many of the same things that were already discussed here. The idea that sort of emerged, though, was that one of the key things is to maintain as many of these ethical levels or standards that your family has risen to in dealing with the dilemma. In other words, if I maintain 3 of these ethical principles with my daughter, while I'm telling her straight out, I'm going to have to, for her safety and security and my peace of mind, violate one of the other ones, which she will not agree to. If I say to her, can I read your emails? And she says, no, you can't, Dad, then I'm still going to be faced with the necessity of dealing with my concern. So if I say to her, dear, I love you, but I'm going to read your emails, I'm going to end up in a conflict. But if I can maintain some of these other ethical standards and say, I respect you, I want to be honest with you about what I'm going to do, and so on, maybe I can bridge the gap of the eruption that's going to occur when I confront her with this. So,
Thank you.
Good morning, Connie. And I'll give
Connie.
you the context of 16 years as a secondary administrator and also parent, both daughter and son in their 20s. So, boy, can I go here quickly. I probably know everything I need to know already, but I find myself sitting in front of emails that I'm curious about. I want to know more. But really, I'm dealing with my own struggle. I probably should be taking action, and I'm hesitant, and so I keep looking for more detail, more backup. And so it's a matter of regrouping and maybe going for some support outside of me to another adult possibly, in order to set some kind of a network or even some ideas that might help me take this next step. Because it's the action that I'm worried about, even though I know it's the action I should take. I probably, with all my experience as a vice principal, would back up that email so I would have a copy before I dealt with the issue. Because I know that I wouldn't read that without taking my child with me to do it. At the same time, I wouldn't have enough trust in a worrisome situation to have that email go completely, because it might be dangerous. There might be safety issues. So I might have my backups there before I go to that issue of trust that I can't regain quickly. But I think the mother knows all she needs to know. Some action needs to be taken.
Thank you. These are fascinating comments. And you're on the right track. I think what you've seen here is that by just having a simple tool to disaggregate the dilemma and be able to see it under these paradigms, you're better able to marshal a set of arguments. And that, after all, is all the paradigm is trying to help you do. help you see what kinds of arguments would lie on one side and what kinds of arguments would lie on the other. Now, all we've done here is to analyze, and the next step beyond analysis is clearly got to be resolution. And as you move forward in this process down through the next years, I hope you'll move through it and move to a process where you're asking, now how, if we've analyzed this, then what are the tools for resolution? Let me just very quickly suggest the three that we use. First is what we describe as an ends-based resolution process, which all of you know as utilitarianism, basically under the heading of you do the greatest good for the greatest number. That sometimes means that a few people have to get a little bit of bad, but you're trying to maximize the benefit for the largest number. The second tool that we talk about is a rule-based principle, which goes back to the thinking of Immanuel Kant, and essentially is a principle of universality. The test here would be, am I about to do something that I would want everybody in the world to do in similar circumstances? Because if I can't say that, I'm about to try to get away with something which I think will be satisfying for me, but it sure would be a disaster if everybody did this. You see what I mean? Kant wants you to hold to a much higher standard. He describes that as his categorical imperative. The way to think about it here is this mother, whatever she does, is about to set out what from now on throughout history will be called the mother's rule. And every mother in the world must do exactly what she did in similar circumstances, because this is the highest right to do. Under that principle, which do you want her to do? And the third one, the care-based principle, is simply the golden rule, which, as many of you know, is not distinctly biblical. It's not specifically Christian. It is at the heart of every one of the world's major cultures. And that is the principle of reciprocity. Put yourself in the other person's position, understand how they might think it through. Now, these may very well, in this situation, provide you with different outcomes. Clearly, if you follow the golden rule and you were Carly, it's pretty obvious what you'd want to have happen. You don't want mother reading the emails. On the other hand, if this is the greatest good for the greatest number, Carly may have to suffer a bit in order that there's not a lot of dead bodies lying around the school in another Columbine-like situation, or in order that she herself survives and doesn't commit suicide or get lured into predatory relationships and so forth. And if it's the Kantian question, then the question is, what is the principle that Kant would want you to universalize? Would it be respect for Carly? Would it be truth-telling in this situation, learning all you needed to know, etc.? There's a multiplicity of those principles out there. Once again, these tools won't give you the answer, just as a set of tools that I might give you with hammer and saw and so forth will not produce the house. You're going to have to use the tools to get to the end result that you want. But without the tools, you'll be stuck. Now, let me just reflect on some of the things that you've told me here. Many of you are groping, properly so, to turn this dilemma, and I want to go back to the meaning of that word, that Greek term, di meaning two, and lemma meaning a fundamental proposition or an assumption taken for granted, and your problem is you've got two of them, and they seem to be equal and competing. Many of you are groping to turn that dilemma into what we've come to call a trilemma. Is there a third way down the middle? Is there something you can do that will both honor her position and find out what you need to know? And you've gone all the way from Connie's point of saying you already know what you need to know and you just need the moral courage to do it, in a sense, over to others who are saying, wait a minute, I want to talk to you first, Carly, about reading your emails, and then we'll find a way to go forward. And the first speaker saying, are there other things we can do before we get to that sort of nuclear option of reading the emails? The dilemma resolution process is in many ways always best served by the trilemma option. That, by the way, tends to come up in a group setting where you're talking this through together. Ethics really doesn't work all that well by going off for a long walk in the woods and going up to the high mountain and contemplating. That can help immensely. But ethics is, by its very nature, a sort of a collegial and social and community-based thing. And some of your best responses, some of your best answers will come as you grope through things together, as you have a common language as you're really trying to develop here, right today, for talking about these in terms of right versus right and so forth. One word of warning: not every dilemma has a trilemma option. And if you think that it does, you will become an unconscionable compromiser, and you will waffle just when you should have stood firm. Search for it. See if you can find it. But if you can't, have the moral courage, and we'll talk about that in a moment, have the moral courage to take a stand for one of these sides and do what needs doing. Now, I rather suspect there are enough consequentialists in this audience that you probably want to know what the outcome of this dilemma was. Bearing in mind that Kant couldn't care less. He wasn't interested in consequences. So those of you who are Kantians, leave the room if you wish. But let me tell you what actually happened. Well, first of all, let me tell you what happened when I did this column. I did it in January, and at the end of it, I did not tell them how it turned out. I said, "What do you think?" And we got more responses to that column. And this is encouraging if you think that ethics matters in these kinds of educational ways. More response to that column than I've ever gotten for any column that I've done in the time with the Institute. And they were interestingly divided. About 2/3 of them said she must read those emails. And about 1/3 said there is no way in the world she can get away with reading those emails. That will destroy the entire relationship. But let me tell you what she actually did. She said, I decided that I really did have to read those emails, which was not hard to do because Carly was out of the house a lot during the day and I was able to be home. And I discovered in reading them that she was signed up for a chat that was going to happen at midnight on this coming Friday night. I'm an early to bed person. That particular weekend, my husband and younger son were off at a Boy Scouts event, so it was just the two of us in the house. I set my alarm and feigned sleeplessness and showed up in the living room at 10 minutes past 12. And there was Carly like a deer caught in the headlights. And of course, I went through all this. What are you doing? What's going on? How can you, what's happening and all of that. She said, my daughter and I talked nonstop for the rest of that weekend. It was some of the most difficult conversations I have ever been in. And by Sunday afternoon, she said to me, I'm glad you caught me. Now, at the point at which she was telling us this had happened 3 or 4 months before. I can't confirm anything that's happened beyond that, but she felt that something had changed. The very fact that they had talked it through and it had been in a context of tough respect, but respect nevertheless on both sides, had really made a difference. There were some, even when I reported that in a subsequent column, there were some who came back and said, how could she? She has ruined this relationship forever. And, the jury will be out forever, I suppose, until neither of these women are on the globe any longer. What effect did it have on the relationship? At least it seems to have pushed through this particular phase and led to something else. If I could turn the conversation now to the next logical step here, which is the question of moral courage. People can have very fine values. They can make very thoughtful, well-reasoned moral decisions. And if they let that decision sit on the shelf and don't have the guts to implement it, that is no different from having no values whatsoever and making no decisions. It comes to the same thing. Moral courage is the catalyst. It's what makes these things happen. I've been groping for a metaphor for it in writing the book. It's the hardware upon which the software of our values operates. If the values, to change the metaphor, if the values are 5 different pearls, moral courage is the string upon which they're strung. It's something like that. It's not a value like the other values, for a very simple reason. It also takes a huge amount of courage to fly a plane into the World Trade Center. Courage by itself, unmoderated by those other values, can be one of the most damaging qualities in the world. Hitler's Air Force had lots of courage. The Mafia has lots of courage. Moderated by those values, which is why the word moral is so important, it is absolutely essential. It took a certain amount of courage, as some of you have alluded to in your comments, for Carly's mother to take that stand. Not something she wanted to do, something she really brooded over, worried about, spent sleepless nights over, frankly. And finally concluded that this is what I must do, this is the stand I need to take. Now, let me tell you one of the things that you'll encounter in that book. And at this point, I want to show you my first slide. Look, we live in a virtual world, so these are virtual slides. Does anybody in the room feel a pressing need to see yet one more PowerPoint? Yeah, I thought not. So let me tell you what this slide looks like. Yeah, I'm going to move aside so you can see it on the screen behind me. What I've got here are simply 3 circles. It's a Venn diagram, right? Big circle up here, 2 little circles, and they intersect. Okay, got the slide? Fine, that's all we need. The top slide is labeled values. The top circle, I'm sorry. The circle over here on my left is labeled danger or risk, and the circle on the bottom over here on the right is labeled endurance. And that really gives you a sense of what moral courage is. It is the willing endurance of significant risk for the sake of principles. Now, you can unpack that a bit and realize that if all you had were the 2 lower circles, willing endurance of significant risk, that's bungee jumping, that's extreme sports. That's what goes on in many military encounters. It's a very powerful and valid thing. That's the sort of physical courage side of it. When it is done for the sake of principle, and not for the sake of making a lot of money or impressing my girlfriend or something like that, when it's done for the sake of principle, it is truly moral courage. If the risk is not there, if the danger is not there, we also don't describe it as courage. Presumably, it doesn't take a lot of moral courage for any one of you to walk in and have a conversation with, show up at school each day. Well, maybe I'm misreading. That's not. We'll call that right versus wrong. The point is, for many of you, working in a culture that works, a culture that makes sense, you don't need a lot of moral courage to go to work. I'm sure you have friends, some of them in very stressful positions where they really don't like what's going on at work and they can't stand their boss and all of that sort of stuff, where every day takes some kind of courage to go to work. The point is, if there is some danger, if there is some risk in the enterprise, that's where courage comes in. And what you're trying to do, and this may sound contradictory, is to build a culture where it doesn't really require a lot of courage just to do the day-to-day stuff. The community is smoothly running. When there are moments of risk and danger, they tend to be coming from outside, and I'll save my courage for those kinds of things, but simply to work with my colleagues, that doesn't take courage. And finally, of course, there are situations where I'm back at these 3 circles again. There are situations where there is a huge amount of risk for the sake of principle. People take one look at it and run as fast as they can the other direction. And we have a word for that. That's cowardice, right? That's timidity. So these 3 things have to come together. And that's really what the book is all about. And it's about the examples of that as they move forward. I want to come back to one point about the usefulness of the right versus right and the moral courage constructs for what you folks do on a daily basis. And let me do that by another example. Several years ago, I heard a story which I hear routinely in one form or another as I go around the world of education. And I know you've heard it innumerable times. This one came from a high school counselor who said, I've been at this for 30 years. I know the kids well. The kids know me and respect me, and they share all kinds of problems with me. And he said, one day I'm sitting in my office on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when a 16-year-old girl comes in, shuts the door, throws herself into my side chair beside my desk, and bursts into tears and says, a month ago, my best friend confided in me that she had a serious eating disorder, and she swore me to secrecy. She made me promise never to tell a soul. In the months since then, I've watched her get thinner and thinner and weaker, and I think she's going to die, and I don't know what to do. Now, if you are that counselor, and all you know is the sort of standard idea about ethics, that it is a question of right versus wrong, you will see no application for ethics and moral reasoning in this situation, because nobody has done anything wrong. It is not wrong for a teenager to be struggling with an eating disorder. It is not wrong for a teenager's friend to be crying over what to do. And it is not wrong for you as a counselor to be trying to help a 16-year-old. There is no wrongdoing in the story. On the other hand, if you understand that ethics is profoundly a question of right versus right, you will be able to see this dilemma from the perspective of this young girl, and you will understand exactly what the tension is. This is a classic truth versus loyalty issue, where, as all of you know, the peer pressures of fidelity and allegiance, loyalty to the group, not ratting on your friends, are powerful and pervasive at that age. And yet in this situation, the need to tell the truth, the need for openness and candor and seeking help is absolutely paramount in what could be a life and death situation. With that in mind, you won't be tempted as a counselor to say just sort of bluntly to this young woman, well, don't you know that you've really got to tell the truth here and that promise keeping isn't really important? She knows the contrary. She knows promise keeping is hugely important. And so do you, frankly. You're not going to want to urge her to just violate her word because she feels like it. What she needs to have is some structure whereby, with your counseling and coaching, you can start by saying, okay, acknowledged, right versus right. There are powerful arguments for keeping your word. There are powerful arguments for speaking up and helping somebody. Which of these ought to prevail? If we think of this as right versus right, we won't be tempted to turn it into a right versus wrong situation and say, well, let's argue against promise keeping so that by default the other side will win. No, promise keeping is hugely important. The question is, how do we help her understand that in this situation, probably truth-telling ought to trump loyalty? And by the way, it is not carved in stone that truth-telling will always trump loyalty. The situation of the fighter pilot shot down behind enemy lines and approached by the enemy who says, where are your buddies, does not normally call upon us to respond, well, the fighter pilot's honest and ethical response must be, oh, I cannot tell a lie, they're hiding over there behind that tree. There are situations where loyalty must trump truth-telling, which is different from truth, by the way, truth-telling. If the question that's asked is of a devious and nefarious nature, and more mayhem would result from answering it candidly than from holding your counsel. But in this situation, it seems to me clear that you can begin to help her understand that she has done the right thing by telling the truth. And a whole range of conversation opens up to the counselor because of understanding the tension, the right versus right ethical dilemma that young woman is in, and yet helping her to come out the other end with perhaps an understanding that, yes, this is the higher right, although the truth, the promise keeping is a hugely important, but in this case, subsidiary right.
Rush, I think in your last comments, it amplified what you said before, but I was going to pick up on something you said about it doesn't take a lot of courage. We're trying to build something that doesn't require that people have courage to come to work. The issue of moral courage and moral perimeter, I think I see fairly often. And what we're trying to do through this process over starting this fall but going on into the future, and I think it's an ongoing process. I don't think it ends 2 years from now. I don't think it really ever ends. But is to create a culture within our school system that involves students, parents, support staff, our administrators, and our teachers in a way which is totally without fear and fear of reprisal for taking the right action. I've observed situations where someone would speak to someone who was sort of in the hierarchy, if there was one lesser than them, or viewed as lesser than them, and in a way which was disrespectful and well beyond that on certain occasions. I guess what we're trying to build is a culture where that doesn't exist anymore, knowing that that's pretty utopian, but that's where we'd like to go. And so the issues of moral perimeter, so that there is no line between a teacher, an administrator, an administrator and a parent and a student, doesn't matter where you move that line, that there are no moral perimeters. We all interact with each other in a manner which is in accord of those ethical values that we have commonly determined.
Exactly.
But I'm wondering if before you leave us today, you could provide some thoughts on that, about how we might move forward to ensure that we build a culture of that nature.
Exactly. This is the huge and important question, and you're absolutely right to be identifying this. What we've talked about so far today has to do with individual ethics, but it is perfectly obvious that the culture within which people express their moral compass will have a lot to do with where that compass resides. You can take a kid from middle America, send him into some of the very good corporations that we work with, and watch that kid's ethics rise. You can take the same kid, send him into Enron, and in 6 months he'll be down at the bottom of the barrel because of the nature of the culture around it, especially for kids who are finding their moral compass as they move forward. It is important in many ways because, as you well know, the one thing that students, especially the younger students, are innately attuned to, without even understanding what they're thinking, is a question of hypocrisy. Kids can smell hypocrisy. They don't even have to have it put out in front of them. They just know it when somebody is a phony. It's hugely important, therefore, that as you move forward with the intention of beginning ultimately to translate these ideas down to the student population, that the culture from which they come doesn't cause the students to say, well, yeah, you're talking to us about all this stuff, but you're not doing it yourself. The culture is, this is what we must be working on. Think about culture in its very simplest definition as how we do things around here. Culture is an adverb. How? It's not the what. It's the way that we do things. It's not, by the way that I do things. That's style. Culture is the way we do things. It's not the things that we do, as I say. It's the methodology. We can do them efficiently. We can do them brusquely. We can do them dangerously. We can do them ethically. And that last one, of course, is the culture of integrity that we're trying to move to. And finally, it is around here. There is, to some extent, a kind of not a moral perimeter, but there is this group that says this is us, and downtown City Hall, that may be them, or some other province in Canada, that may be them, but this is us, and this is we have a responsibility for this particular culture. One other point that you picked up on, that I picked up from what you were saying, this notion that it's very important for us to have push the perimeter out, and all of us have the same set of values within that culture. Bear in mind that still permits us to have all kinds of distinctions between individuals around things that don't have to do with values. There can still be distinctions about salary, and about position, and about hierarchy, and responsibilities, and who does what, and all of that kind of stuff. But on this crucial point about ethics, there must be no distinctions. There must be the same understanding of honesty right through the system, the same understanding of responsibility and respect at the top level. These qualities in a good culture will translate in very different ways. The folks in the room who are involved in finance can probably go for years on end and never think about applying honesty to their work in a way that means don't plagiarize. The folks over in the communications department know plagiarism the minute they see it, and they're constantly worried about it. Am I saying things? Is this my own language, or must I put this in quotation marks? They can probably go for years on end without ever thinking about some of the fine points of accuracy in accounting that the finance people have to worry about. Those are all subsets of this broad concept of honesty, but that honesty has got to be there. And what we're working on now are protocols, structures, ways in which we can have this conversation around cultures and actually move toward the kind of culture of integrity that we all want. And that, John, I'm grateful for your invitation to continue this conversation, because I really think that is where it has to go. It will come to this through the processes of understanding right versus right dilemma resolution, and through the processes of understanding moral courage. But the end result is not that. It's not just that we ourselves become better individuals. It is that we are all part of this whole that is bigger than any one of us. And the culture of any one of your schools is more than the sum of the ethical impulses of the people who happen to inhabit it at this moment. There are histories, there are campfire stories, there are external influences, all kinds of things that create the wholeness of this culture of integrity. And that's the real encouraging thing. If we can build it, we can pass it on. And when we're no longer there, it will still have benefited by what we have done to create this ongoing culture.
Rush, unfortunately, the time has gone quickly for us this morning. I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for a thoughtful, thought-provoking conversation with you. It is helping us to build on the work that we are doing in Burnaby. It's our intent to continue this dialogue with you throughout the year. Thank you for the work you're doing with global ethics. It has been a wonderful opportunity this morning. I know you did come to our district several years ago in live person, and we enjoyed that at Burnaby South. So on behalf of all of us, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.